If anybody wanted to go to the bathroom first before the next talk, we'd quite happily delay it for 5 minutes just so everybody can use the restroom.
Yeah. Test 1, 2, 3.
two, two, two.
Lucia Griggi, yeah? What was your seminar called? What was the seminar called? Or what, did you have a title for it?
Yeah, you can just say talking about shooting wildlife in colder climates in polar regions.
Okay.
And yeah, just wildlife and adventure photography in our colder climates.
Okay, cool.
Two. The next seminar on the live stage will be Lucia Griggi speaking on adventure and wildlife photography in colder climates, starting in 2 minutes' time. Please take your seats.
Yep. Sounds good. Hello, everyone. Okay, you'll have to tell me how the audio is. So, is this a good pace, good sound? Okay, good. So, welcome, and yeah, lovely to see you all here. So, my name is Lucia Griggi. I'm an adventure and wildlife photographer and film director. So a lot of my time is spent in our colder climates up in the polar regions. So we got some thumbs up there. So a lot of that consists of being down in Antarctica and up in the Arctic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, maybe a little bit of behind the scenes on what it actually looks like to be in these places. Before that, I'm just going to give you a little insight into my life, just a bit about my previous career, which was in action sports, and how it led into a more calming wildlife arena. So to start off, I'm just going to play you a little film just to get you in the mood. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. So that's a little insight into where my camera takes me to some, pretty far-fetched and quite unique places, which I feel very privileged to be able to travel to. So to start off, does anyone know where this wave might have been taken? Shout out, any ideas? So I started surf photography, so that's how I actually got into photography itself. So this wave actually was taken in Antarctica, which is quite funny really, because I had a career of sort of 10 to 15 years, and I was always trying to fight for a cover shot, or, I traveled around the world, really, traveling to some amazing places like Hawaii and Fiji, and I used to get published, but fast forward 10, 15 years, I was down in Antarctica shooting some chinstrap penguins, and suddenly this wave came out of nowhere. So of course, being quite conditioned to shooting action sports and surfing, I took this picture which actually made the front cover of quite a big surf journal. So I thought it was quite ironic. Sometimes when you put your camera, the sea isn't a particularly natural place for me. This is actually a shot of me swimming and that is, a very huge thing of why photography is really something that's part of me. So for 10 years I worked on the world tour of surfing. So I traveled around with all the pro surfers. I went to places like Fiji, Tahiti. I was in jet skis, I was on boats, and I, ended up having a career working for the likes of Rip Curl, Billabong, all these different brands, shooting some of the best waves in the world. This is a photograph which I took quite some time ago, and it's at a wave called Pipeline. So it's quite a dangerous wave on the North Shore of Hawaii, and I remember this swim quite clearly because there really weren't any girls out swimming, or the girls were on the beach with the bikinis and the boys are out sort of taking the shots, so I was quite nervous. And the swim out alone is on a shallow reef, and it's quite daunting, so you really have to sort of know what you're doing. And I finally got out there, and I remember I had my Canon 5D and an 85mm, I think it was a 1.8, so it was quite a small setup, but it was the perfect setup for me, and it was light. I had the courage to swim out, and this is one of the first shots I ever got, so it's quite a monumental shot for me. This is the same wave, a little bit more pulled back, so I was swimming in the channel and wanted to capture the beauty of the full wave and the sun setting behind. And it was quite hard because with a lot of surf photography, trying to get an empty wave shot without surfers inside, can be quite challenging without sort of photoshopping the heads out. So yeah, I was quite pleased with this too. This is a shot I took in Fiji as well. We had a really monumental swell where all these big wave surfers with this shot because I got a lot of emails about it saying, well, how did you capture that? And the surfer's hair looks really dry. Have you photoshopped or is that real? But that's completely real, and this is the beautiful scenes for any of you that, I see some nods, so any of you that are familiar with seeing the world from underneath the water, this is the beauty that you can really capture. So this took me to California. I ended up living there for about 10 years. I worked for magazines. I had an agent in New York. I was working as a commercial lifestyle photographer in LA. I started working into film a little bit more, I started working on books and publishing books in the surfing industry, the skateboard industry. So, you know, these very alternate sort of niche sports at the time. And it was an amazing life. It was extremely competitive. It was exhausting. And, you know, when you're sort of at that game with an agent and working through things, you know, it can be quite traumatizing with the reality of, you know, the people around you and, you know, the competitive nature you need to have in order to, you know, be seen or have your shots published. So after that, a few things changed for me. And I think this is probably the part that most people are here for, which is more the wildlife and these remote locations. But for me, it was more of a personal journey, and I think that's very important to you know, voice this from my journey as a photographer, is that everybody's journey is different, and I'm sure, you know, in the audience here, we have so many different focus points from, you know, hobbyists to pros, you know, working more with agents, corporate, maybe, you know, wanting to get to a particular stage. But for me, I feel I've never stuck or really focused on one thing. I think for me, photography and my camera and the work I do is always going to be transient. So, you know, with my earlier life of shooting surfing and traveling the world, you know, that supported that. Then when I wanted to calm down a little bit more or, you know, go into a different, sort of reflect differently in life, then for me going to wildlife where it was less hectic, it was quite a meditative place for me. So in 2016, I lost my mother, and I think that's what really changed things. So I get on an icebreaker ship, and I decided to take myself off as far as I could, where I would pick reasons, or you can go on, you know, commercial ships, and, you know, be a filmmaker or document, you know, some of these amazing places by using this platform. So I did, you know, are amazing, and your main focus points when you're in the Arctic, and that can be the Arctic Russia, it can be Arctic Canada, it can really, you know, be quite broadly seen, was of course polar bears. So, you know, we got the opportunity to work, and as you saw in the little film before, there was a little drone shot of, you know, a mother and two cubs. So, polar bear shooting, I mean, first of all, I've spent a lot of time in the Arctic, and it's sad to say that every time I've returned, it is a very much changing climate, and the polar bears are going to be, or are starting to feel the effects of our changing planet, you know, through climate change. Their natural habitat is to roam, to be on the sea ice. The way in which they will hunt and be able to feed and survive is on the sea ice, where they can hunt seals, where they can train their young. But what I've seen over the years really is, because of the lack of sea ice, what's happened is they're gravitating closer to a lot of the towns, a lot of the Arctic Russian towns. You know, you see nowadays quite a lot of very underweight polar bears. So, you know, there's this side of it which, you know, is quite sad really. But on the other side, you know, when you do see these families of vibrant polar bears and their cubs, you know, it is such a privilege to actually find and see, and especially if they're active on the sea ice. So a lot of the time, we'll go up through a vessel, we'll have an icebreaker in front if we need to break through the ice, and then we'll have little ribs or, you know, zodiacs where we can climb on, and then we can sort of get a better view. You know, some of you may be focusing on wildlife, others, you know, might be photographers ourselves. You know, with that talent, we can really focus our cameras on anything. So, you know, this is an example of, you know, shooting some portraits. The boy on the left, this was in sort of a very Soviet Russian town, and, you know, it was just sort of, I like to quite find the beauty in some of these places, because some of these places in the high Arctic are very bland, they're very, you know, it's very harsh environment. And so the girl on the right, this was a Siberian girl, and, you know, I saw her blue eyes, and I thought, okay, you know, how can we get a portrait and really bring her in front of, you know, sort of a background which would highlight that? So I think a lot of portraiture and in the way you can shoot it is, seeing your subject. Obviously, you're going to have a language barrier, so that's not always easy. So the way I would overcome that is, it's really about your presentation non-verbally to that person, to enable them to feel comfortable for you to pick your lens out and take that portrait. This was taken with an 85 1.2. I very much like the Canon primes. I've only ever really used Canon, and I am a Canon ambassador, but for me that's always worked, especially with sport. Canon was the company that I gravitated to because of the sort of equipment that was available and the price point, and I must say I've always been very happy. But whether you're on Canon or whether you're shooting Nikon or Olympus or Sony, any other photography equipment, when you're talking about portraits, I think it's really important to maybe look at your prime lenses and having that large aperture where you can really get that more cinematic and fall off look. So the depth of field, you can really play around with that, and on some lenses, of course, you can really just get the eyelashes and the eyes in detail, and then have that softer background approach. So one place we went to was Wrangel Island, and Wrangel Island is an island sort of in between Alaska and up into the Russian territories. It's known for the most dense population of polar bears. During the summer, they have huts and rangers that will look after these areas. As you can see on the window behind here, there's lots of bars to, protect from the polar bears if they do decide to come a bit close. And there's obviously guns. And if you're visiting these areas, you're most likely also going to see the culture and the lifestyle around, what you're shooting. Because a lot of these areas are very protected areas. So somewhere like Wrangel, you need special permits to get to. The living conditions are very bare bone. So for example, where, you can live or where you have to stay in these huts, with researchers. But it's very interesting. And, these people, these scientists that are on the ground, they have so much knowledge around these animals and about the wildlife and behaviour. I think if you do get to these places, it's really important to utilise that. I think one thing about wildlife photography is being prepared. It's really about understanding your subject. I mean, like anything, whether it's sport, whether it's you taking a portrait, you need to pre-see that shot before it happens. So, if you understand, the personalities of, the polar bears or your bird life, the skuas, the terns, you're really going to be able to predict that shot. So with your camera setup, it'll put you in a better position than if you don't know too much about that subject. This is a shot I took a while ago, and I quite like it, and it was used quite widely in some conservation efforts because it really showcases that the polar bear, isn't on the sea ice. It's not hopping very elegantly across the ice, searching for food. And it's, this is an example of, you could really choose to take a picture in a few ways and to do a more environmental capture, something which is with a wider lens like your 70-200 or a 16-35, to really help the viewer understand the environment your subject is in. So with wildlife, I think a lot of the time we always gravitate towards, keeping a very tight shot, using our 400s or our 100-400 or whatever your zoom lenses are, your telephoto lenses are. But actually just take a minute, and once you've got that shot, once you've got that, very glossy kind of cropped or, very tight shot, then have a look around you and see the environment, because I think that's very important. This is an example of really what it's like. The Arctic is quite bleak in some ways. So if you were thinking, okay, do I want to go south and go to Antarctica, or would I prefer to go to Svalbard and go up to the Arctic? I think to make your choice, I would say that the Arctic is a much more slow, it's the life is sparingly. So with Antarctica, you're going to land down on the peninsula, and you're going to have the penguins, you're going to smell the penguin poop, you're going to see the humpback whales. It's going to be life all around you. The brush-tailed penguins are going to be on the rockeries. With the Arctic in Svalbard, you can spend 4 or 5 days, and it's mostly about fauna, hiking fauna, seeing the traces of the wildlife, like the Arctic fox, or going to a haul out of walrus. So although you both, poles, you're seeing wildlife, it's a very different experience. And I think setting expectations of what it is that you really want to capture and see, and your personality in, are you patient? Like for me, going to the Arctic from Antarctica, I'm not particularly patient sometimes. So, I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? So it's a different feel. So moving on to Antarctica, this will explain it a bit more. Has anyone been to Antarctica? Okay, so we've got 2 in the front here. Is that a third? No? Okay, so a few people. Where did you guys go? Where did you go? Okay, so you've been there for a while. Well, then you should be on stage, because if you'd had a winter there, then I feel a little bit intimidated here. How about yourself? Where? Did you go to the peninsula? Nice, okay. So a lot of my platform, a lot about photography is about access. So whether you're shooting a sporting event, whether you're shooting wildlife, if it's not in your back garden, then it's how do I get there? How can I put myself when I'm down there into the right spot to be able to get the shot that I can take home and really value and enjoy? So for the peninsula, which is on the map here, on the left-hand side, you see the bit of land that's kind of sticking out. That is the most sort of accessed area where you can join small expedition vessels. I wouldn't necessarily say go on any larger ones because you won't get the land time, where it is quite a lot of money, but it will give you the access, and will stop for a week or 2 weeks along some of these amazing places. So, and then if you look on the north side, which maybe you would have flown into, but Queen Maud is where you can fly into, and it's a very different landscape. So you have to fly in either from South Africa or from Chile, and it's normally by private jet or some kind of utility plane, and then you'll land on an ice runway where you will be able to then go off into your camps and then explore. The landscape is very, very different. It's very flat. It's got some mountain ranges. But it's a desert, so you don't have that life where you would on the peninsula, where you have the water. So it's a very different feel. This is a shot I took. So I went to Atka Bay. There's a German research base there, and it's a place where there's an emperor penguin colony. So I spent some time there. This would be an example of a shot on the peninsula with a junior Weddell seal, where you've got a lot more life because you've got that interaction between the different animals down there. This is quite a funny shot because I was actually shooting a leopard seal, which was just to the left of this little one, and I thought he must have a death wish, but he kept coming on and sort of wanting to get the attention. I don't know, for those who have seen what a leopard seal looks like, has anyone sort of maybe had an experience with one, but they're kind of like these serpent, snake-looking seals, which you would question whether they're a seal, really. But they're very amazing and beautiful, but they have very big teeth. So I'm sure if this guy had got a little bit closer, he might not have been around anymore. But an example, the reason I'm bringing this up is because, for a start, this image really showcases, using prime lenses. So with this, I think I was using, at the time, a 300 or 400 prime, and you can see how the sharpness of the whiskers, you can see the eyes, you can see how on top of the head there's the snowflakes, and that really gets emphasized when you invest in sort of that higher end kit. Of course, it limits your focal range. So with zoom lenses, sometimes you can lose a little bit of that, but at the same time it gives you much more flexibility and to be able to frame your shot in the way you want to. Generally, because I enjoy using primes and that's kind of what I feel comfortable with, I've always sort of taken a 300 or a 400 and that's always been enough. If you do venture to something like a 600 focal lens on the zoom lenses, I would sometimes use that for humpback whales, but it's actually almost too much sometimes. And if you've got a camera which has enough megapixels to, if you did want to kind of crop in a bit, then sometimes that's a better way. So, the story. So this is an example of what it looks like in Antarctica. So this is kind of the camps and where you live. This is kind of the communal area and how it's set up for the summer. Of course, some places are packed up in the summer and put away. Mostly sort of the ones that sort of house the tourists like me, photographers that are coming down. But then other bases are all year round, especially with scientists. This is the landscape and what it looks like. So there's these kind of nooks that come out in this very sort of vast moon-like exterior. And then, in order, or the project we were on at the time, our scope of work was to have a utility plane and some high Arctic pilots. They were flying down from Canada to bring the utility planes to Antarctica, and we had to get them ready because we were going to take the plane and the team and we were going to fly all the way down the peninsula base hopping, and then it was to take aerial photos of the Antarctic ice shelf, so to monitor and to see, flying very low. They said, okay, well, we're going to cut the windows out, cut the doors out. We've got like this Red Bull free flying base guy that's going to just strap in with you so he can hang you out the plane, and you're going to be like 400, 500 feet off the floor. So I was like, right. Well, I said to him, I'm not very good with heights, so that doesn't really help, but I do like some aerial photography, so sure, why not? So we prepared the plane, and when we were sort of flying, we stop at places like this, which are containers where we either sleep or we get supplies. This is an example of probably me sitting, bossing people around for trying to do a film project. So yeah, that's kind of what it looks like on the plane. And then, a quick nap. So if we were to have some nap time, we would just put our mats down. And as you can see, I don't really have too much of order with my camera equipment, but, I just sort of lay it all down around with me. And it's the same with when you're sort of hiking off into, the ice plains and the sea ice. It's really what works for you. So I can definitely give you some tips of, how to work with your equipment in these colder climates. Now, in the summer in Antarctica, it doesn't always get too cold. In the interior of Antarctica, it can drop down because you don't have that warming of the ocean. So in this instant where we were in Atka Bay, really I was only supposed to spend a couple of hours on the sea ice where, in front of me, if you can see in the background there, is a very large colony of emperor penguins. Now, I hadn't ever photographed this type of penguin before, so I was quite overwhelmed. And there's nothing wrong in that, but it does give you a panic because I was thinking, okay, well, I've been in Antarctica many times. I've shot the brush-tailed penguins, which are a smaller species that vary on the coastal areas, but I don't really understand the behavior of these. And, it's very, very harsh environment, and it took me a lot longer than I thought. And also, when you get given assignments, you've got that pressure of, okay, well, this trip is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds, and if I don't really provide or be able to get the shot for that client, then, it's quite a lot of pressure. So saying that, I took down, as you can see, there's quite a few different lenses there. So I had a lot of primes. I did have an 800, I had a 400, a 300, and then I probably would have had a wide, so I would have had like a 16 to 35 probably. And I'm sure 70 to 200 would have been in there somewhere. So that's kind of the range I like to cover when I'm going to these places. Backpacks, anything for adventure which is flexible. So I use F-Stop, but there's also other brands which are, extremely versatile, that are waterproof, especially if they're sitting on the ice for some time. And, for camera bodies, I've got, at the time when I was shooting this, I was on DSLRs. So I was shooting like the 1DX, I was shooting the 5D, I had a 5DS. So I had all different ranges, of different Canon bodies, which would give me more of a medium format look, which would give me a faster frame rate. So, I really kind of varied up. And I understand that, I guess I'm very privileged to be able to have that. So if you were to condense that equipment and you wanted to go lighter, then, a zoom lens would probably be more efficient, especially if you're going into some of these areas where, it's a trek. And, for example, I have people with me. So I have, assistants that carry, I have guides to take me over the sea ice because it's quite dangerous. So you want to make sure you're, taking the right way. So I think if you broke it down, you could go for 2 bodies, have a wide on one body, and then, have a more of a zoom lens on another. And I think that really is kind of your prime setup, especially if you don't want to be too held down by it. So this is actually an example on the way home, because I managed to get hypothermia, because the thing was, as I had stayed out there for 12 hours, I got so excited that I forgot, the safety in it, and they ended up throwing me back on the plane, and I passed out, so it was quite bad. But they put me in this hammock, and apparently I slept the whole way home. But, I guess in these places you get so wrapped up in it, you spent so much money on getting there, and then you're just like, well, one more shot will be fine. But actually it's not. So, make sure that you take water, make sure that you've got your layers. So a question, you may want to ask is, what should I dress for? How do I dress in the Arctic or Antarctic? And really, like many sports or adventure, it's really about layering up. So if you can have your, thermal underlayers, your t-shirts can be layered up, so you have the opportunity to trap that heat and to also take stuff off if you need. Then normally what I would put on top of that is I get a like a construction suit. So I have like a really hard wearing, I'm not sure if I have it in the photo here, but I have it's like it's feel like working on oil ships. So I like to just sort of it's like a onesie, so I put it on, and so then I can just sort of pull it up, open a bit if I get hot, but it also just protects me from the wind. So if you didn't have something like that, then just make sure you have a really good jacket, make sure you have, another sort of thinner jacket underneath, and just make sure you have gloves. And if you're in snow, then you just need your thick snowshoes or some, really good waterproof hiking boots. But to be honest, if you're in those environments, you need specialist, snow boots. And then, with your socks, a small thing, but if your toes get cold, then that's you finished shooting. So just make sure you have your thermal layers and you have some thicker socks to go on over the top. This is what it's like, waiting for light, eating dry food. This is an example of the actual project shooting out of the window. So I'm harnessed in and actually there. So when you're doing aerial photography, it's important to, really be quite light, because you're not going to have the opportunity just to have everything around you. So I've got headphones on there talking to the pilot, so they can tell me, okay, ahead we've got a pod of killer whales. It's going to be on your left, so I'm ready, or I have to jump to my right on the wire, on the string that I'm attached to. I've got, I think, like either a 2470 or a 1635, and then I would have a 70 to 200 on the other one. So that gives me an opportunity to really see the ice shelf in its entirety, and then to zoom in and to capture if there's any wildlife. On the right, that's where I live. I have a pelican case. They're great because you can just throw them around. I think there's someone in the audience that likes to throw pelican cases from Canon over there. He's not going to be handling mine. And then the bags, just, airtight and waterproof, just to put your equipment in. And then you can see I've sort of got a harness, and I'm sort of easily maneuverable. This is just a couple of examples of getting around on skidoos. And then, packing up and sort of heading home, really. So it's quite a big operation, but I would say if you wanted to start out or you had an interest in going, is going on a cruise line or trying to get on an expedition vessel. The smaller the better. Don't worry necessarily about the comfort if that's not a priority. Go for somewhere which the smaller vessels are going to get into the more better places. So choose the company wise who you'd want to go with. So this is a shot I took in South Georgia. That was another project I did for a while. And this is an example of shooting a wider shot. So not automatically going to your zoom and thinking, oh, actually, how can I tell this story? A lot of photography is about storytelling and, about, also maybe a responsibility, especially shooting this kind of stuff, to take back home and to really showcase, to everyone, to showcase what it's really like. And, unfortunately, a lot of these wild places might not be around forever. So I used a wide lens here. I had these are king penguins, so they're not the emperors. You can see the king penguins in South Georgia. I think Snow Island, or there might be a few places on the peninsula you can see the king penguins, but mostly they're brush-tail. This is a black-browed albatross. This was taken in the Falklands. And this is just an example of, being a bit more creative with your work and, experimenting. This was taken in broad daylight, but I stopped down really, really low. So because you've got the reflection of the white, I could almost just darken the background naturally through my camera. And, I really wanted kind of just a slightly more kind of art side look. So, sometimes when you come to these colonies, and it's so overwhelming, whether it's penguin colonies or you've got, the nesting birds, it's, my advice is to consolidate. So don't see the whole thing. Start and pick off different animals and see their mannerisms, see how they interact, because taking away is more powerful than trying to include a frame with so much more. Aerial photography. For those that are interested in that, most of the time, if you want to shoot aerials, you need to, this is in Alaska, so this is either by bush plane. Bush planes are great because you either have a window you can shoot down and out of, or ideally a helicopter, but it's expensive and you have to get a helicopter with the doors off, and some companies won't do that. Many a times I have something less than efficient and I have to interpret, how I can squish my lens out the front window sitting in the back or something ridiculous, but you make it work. So I've done a lot of aerial photography in Iceland, and Iceland's a very amazing place. And I think Iceland is a great suggestion because it has everything on our doorstep. And if you go up to Grimsby Island and you're in the Arctic Circle, you've got all the puffin colonies, and that is amazing for puffin shooting. If you want to if you're interested in this and shooting the braided rivers of Iceland, the south coasts are amazing. So, the interesting thing when you're shooting aerials is how you see this image now. It's not how you see it through the eye. So for those who have done any aerial photography, you don't see the colours until you put them through your computer and then pull them out. So there's not much work gone into this other than the fact that I've, sort of adjusted some curves, and as soon as you bring out what's there by adding some contrast, you start to see all these beautiful sort of amazing patterns and colours. Braided rivers are, patterns of water that it's glacier melt off, so it comes from the glacier interior and runs into the ocean. So what you can see here is the ocean, and then, the water kind of going through this very Mars-like landscape and how it joins. This is another example. So, this is a cooler shot in the fact that, it's kind of probably in winter. You've got the rivers that are starting to run a bit, and most of the time, I would say shooting either something like a 24-70, or, I say those numbers, but something around that, and a 70-200 is more than enough. So you're never really going to want to have a lens more than, I'd say 200, but saying that, this is an example of what you can find with wildlife from above. So that was shot with a 100-400, so I did have that 400 capability. I don't shoot primes out of the window because it's just too sensitive, so I'd always stick with zoom lenses. Plus, reality is you can't stick a zoom lens out of the window without probably, the plane crashing or something. So they wouldn't really like that. So you have to keep quite compact. So what else is there? Take a look around. You're going to all these amazing places. There's, portraits of, primal cultures, working with the Inuits in the Arctic, or, working with this girl here was from Panama. So we went into the Darien jungle, which is a stretch between Panama and Colombia. It used to be known as sort of a drug trafficking place, but nowadays it's got some native people, so you can really go and immerse yourself into how they live. And then on the right, look at your landscapes. This is in the Arctic, and with landscapes, although I'm not going to go into it in this talk, just always make sure your light's right. I mean, that's the key to landscapes, is making sure you've got that nice, beautiful morning or evening light. And even best so, in Arctic or Antarctic conditions, you can shoot from 12 p.m. all the way through to 3 a.m. because midnight sun is beautiful. So a lot of the time I sleep during the day, and then I'll get up at night and shoot through the night. Again, just some portraits here. These would all have been shot on primes, so an 85 or a 50. This was a commission with Condé Nast, and it was working in Indonesia and Malaysia, working with people that were sort of organic farming with bees. So, a lot of my work does vary, but, again, it's just applying the same kind of thought process, but into a different subject. This was in the Philippines. I think, again, I use an 85 prime. So, really understanding the subject, getting behind the subject, and, she was kind of fanning in this market and cooking some chicken satay or something like that. And I thought it was chicken satay, but actually, in the end, it was something that I was quite horrified because it wasn't. It was something like chicken butt, or I don't know, it was awful. But the thing is that, really emerging and sort of starting to talk, and she was laughing because she gave me one to try. And then, my colleague was like, oh, that isn't like a chicken satay, Lucia, that's, the arse end of something like, and I was like, ooh. So, but, that's the whole part of travel and, really immersing in it. Being down in Patagonia, if you do fly out to Antarctica, you might go down to Ushuaia or into, the Patagonia or Chile. And this was a story on crab fishing, and then just staying with that family. And, this was a more photojournalist approach, but, understanding the culture, understanding, how they eat the crab and what they do and who's there. So, when you travel, it doesn't have to be focused always on wildlife. You can really start seeing that beauty around. So last bit I'm going to talk about, I would like to give a little room for a couple of questions if anyone has any, but is underwater. So I specialise in underwater photography and filmmaking, and spend a lot of the time in Galapagos. And this was a recent shoot we had where we were working on some conservation films, and this is a fever of golden rays. So one of the bigger things I did was I sold all my DSLR, and I actually jumped to mirrorless, and I found it really, it was really important for me because underwater and with underwater setups, it just with the follow tracking and just, really, all the tracking capabilities which it's given me, which my DSLRs, weren't quite there yet or didn't have, it enables me to focus on my free diving. So I don't scuba. I'm a free diver and I train as much as I can for that. So I hold my breath and I go down, and I just like to be immersed with wildlife. And, this is an example of, a different kind of shot, because a lot of the time we see a subject and we think, okay, let's try and get the front, or, how are we going to work this? But a shot I really like to do for anyone that does shoot underwater is to really showcase being part of what they're doing. So coming behind and sort of almost joining them in their journey, you can really, it really allows you to put the viewer in the place of them. If I had been at the front, they probably would have parted or dived down or whatever. So just really think about your approach with wildlife, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the water, but it's a good example because in the water you really, really have to consider where you're going to go. An example of that is, if you've got dolphins or you've got anything coming towards you, you need to be dropped off, to the side or in front of them. Obviously not invading or, not changing their behavior. And my key point is you must, when you're working with wildlife, to enable a good shot and for them to give you a shot, it's really important that they come to you. So there's no point in chasing wildlife, there's no point in running around, because you're never really going to get that good shot. This is a blue-footed booby. Again, this is a prime lens. I love my primes because you can see the water drops coming off. This was taken actually with an older camera with the 5D, and I love that camera too. And an example of this shot, which was quite widely used, it was, obviously Galapagos penguins fighting for their food. But I only had 7 frames or something like that, so I know we get quite fixated on 30 frames per second, or but when I was in Brooks Lodge shooting bears last summer, I had the R3, for example, which is Canon's sort of flagship camera, and it was, but, if you can't afford it, or if, you need to work towards it, there's plenty of cameras as well where, if you're focused on getting the shot and you can really anticipate that shot, then you can still do it without having 1,000,000 frames per second. I'm not saying it doesn't help, because I would still choose it now, but it's not the end of the world, because it's about waiting, it's about getting that moment. And sometimes when you get that moment, when you know it's hard, it's almost more, it feels like more satisfying. So, just some more shots here, underwater with the sea lions, and always try to remember to sort of add people in, and sometimes subjects into these natural environments, like this kind of big world, small person, can also really look beautiful and really tell a story to a viewer. So I'm going to leave you with a really short clip just from a shot I did in the Azores not so long ago, where you can kind of see what I do for a few seconds, that's it. And you can see the beauty of what we capture. This was more of a film shoot, so I will leave you with this. So leaving on that note, this is a little introduction to my world, and I hope, there's just a little inspiration, or, just anything to showcase that, we can exist with our natural world. And I think the key is live alongside it, and let's try not to damage it. Let's try to understand it, and the more we do that, the more we can actually play. So yeah, thank you very much. And I think we're just going to have a few minutes for any questions. So we do have a microphone. Don't know where he's gone. Oh, there he is. Hello, Colin. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask me? If you prefer not to do it here, I will go to the Canon stand, or I can just wait here too for a few minutes. But any questions? Can I help in any way? If you're planning on going to any of these places, don't be shy.
Just take me as your assistant, please.
Okay, I'll just let the Canon guy know, because I think he's first in line, but I will remember that. Any questions? No? Well, there's a gentleman in the front here, I'm going to embarrass now, but he was saying that he's been in Antarctica in the winters, which is extremely harsh. So can you tell us, where you...
Scientific research teams overwintering in the subantarctic islands and on the actual Antarctic shelf itself.
Nice.
Just doing climate change research, and then also working with elephant seals, killer whales, subantarctic and Antarctic fur seals. So yeah.
Wow.
Spent over 18 months doing that.
Nice. Very jealous. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, feel free to come up to the Callan stand if you want to just have more of an intimate conversation. And yeah, thank you very much and enjoy your day. Thank you.